Glimpses of Masonic History by Charles Webster Leadbeater. Preface. Upon authoring The Hidden Life in Freemasonry, it was initially my intention to devote the second chapter to a succinct overview of Masonic history. I soon discovered that such a design was impractical. Even the most condensed account of any utility would require considerably more space than I could allocate, and would entirely overweight the volume with what constitutes merely a single facet of its broader subject. The evident alternative was to publish the historical exposition independently. Hence this work, which effectively serves as a companion volume to the former. The central theme of both volumes, and indeed the singular rationale for their publication, is to expound upon precisely what the title signifies: the hidden life in Freemasonry, the formidable force in the background, perpetually at work yet forever concealed from sight, which has directed the transmission of the Masonic tradition through all the vicissitudes of its turbulent history, and continues to inspire the utmost enthusiasm and devotion among the brethren of the craft today. The existence and the enduring work of the head of all true Freemasons is the one and sufficient cause for the vitality and power of this most extraordinary organization. If we comprehend his relationship to it and what he envisions for it, we shall also recognize that it embodies one of the most magnificent designs ever conceived for the betterment of the world and for the effusion of spiritual force. Many of our brethren have been for numerous years unconsciously participating in this magnificent altruistic endeavor. If they can be guided to comprehend precisely what it is that they are doing and why, they will pursue the great work more joyfully and more intelligently, investing into it the complete strength of their nature, both bodily and spiritual, and enjoying the fruits of their labors far more profoundly than ever before. Chapter 1. The Four Analytical Schools. A history of Freemasonry would constitute a colossal undertaking, demanding encyclopedic knowledge and many years of rigorous research. I lay no claim to possessing the attributes and the erudition requisite for the composition of such a work. All I can aspire to do is to cast a measure of illumination upon some of the obscure recesses within that history, and to bridge over to some extent a few of the more conspicuous chasms between the sections of it which are already well known. The origins of Masonry. The true origins of Freemasonry, as I have observed in a preceding volume, are obscured within the mists of antiquity. Masonic authors of the 18th century speculated upon its history with a distinct lack of critical rigor, predicating their perspectives upon a literal adherence to the historical and chronological narratives of the Old Testament, and upon the peculiar legends of the craft bequeathed from operative eras within the old charges. Thus it was posited in all earnestness by Dr. Anderson in his initial book of constitutions that Adam, our primordial forebear, created after the image of God, the great architect of the universe, must inherently have possessed the liberal sciences, particularly geometry, inscribed on his heart, while others of a less fanciful disposition have attributed its genesis to Abraham, Moses, or Solomon. Dr. Oliver, writing as recently as the early part of the 19th century, maintained that Masonry, as we encounter it today, is the sole authentic relic of the faith of the patriarchs before the flood, while the ancient mysteries of Egypt and other countries, which so closely resembled it, were but human corruptions of the one primitive and pure tradition. As scientific and historical knowledge advanced across other disciplines of research, and notably in the exegesis of the scriptures, scientific methodologies were progressively applied to the study of Masonry, so that today there exists a voluminous and compelling corpus of reasonably precise information upon the history of the craft. In consequence of this and allied avenues of investigation, there are four principal schools or inclinations of Masonic thought, not in any way necessarily formalized or organized as schools, but categorized according to their relation to four prominent spheres of knowledge lying primarily outside the Masonic field. Each has its own characteristic approach towards Freemasonry. Each has its own distinct canons of interpretation of Masonic symbols and ceremonies, although it is evident that many contemporary authors are influenced by more than one school. The authentic school. We may consider first what is occasionally termed the authentic school, which emerged in the latter half of the 19th century in response to the expansion of critical knowledge in other fields. The venerable traditions of the craft were minutely examined in the light of authentic records within reach of the historian. An exhaustive degree of research was undertaken into lodge minutes, documents of all kinds pertaining to Masonry past and present, records of municipalities and boroughs, legal and judicial enactments. In fact, whatever written records were available were diligently consulted and systematically classified. In this field, all Masons are profoundly indebted to Robert Freak Gould, the eminent Masonic historian, William James Hughan, George William Speth, and David Murray Lyon, the chronicler of Scottish Masonry, Dr. Chetwode Crawley, whose scholarship upon the early Irish craft is in its way a classic, and others of the inner circle of the renowned Lodge Four-Crowned, number 2076, the captivating transactions of which are a precious repository of historical and archaeological lore. Two monumental figures in Germany are Johann Friedrich Findel, the historian, and Dr. Wilhelm Begemann, who conducted the most exacting and painstaking investigations into the old charges of the operative craft. An immense volume of material which will be of enduring value to students of our craft has become accessible through the labors of the scholars of the authentic school. This school, however, exhibits limitations which are the direct consequence of its very methodology of approach. In an association as clandestine as Masonry, there must undeniably be much that has never been committed to writing, but only transmitted orally in the lodges, so that documents and records are but of partial utility. The written archives of speculative Masonry scarcely antedate the revival in 1717, while the earliest extant minutes of any operative lodge belong to the year 1598. The inclination of this school, therefore, is understandably to derive Masonry from the operative lodges and guilds of the Middle Ages, and to postulate that speculative elements were subsequently grafted upon the operative foundation, this hypothesis being in no way contradicted by existing records. Brother Robert Freak Gould affirms that if we can assume the symbolism or ceremonial of Masonry to predate 1717, there is practically no limit whatever to the antiquity that can be ascribed to it, but many subsequent scholars look for the genesis of our mysteries no further back than the medieval builders. Amongst this school there is a commensurate tendency, also perfectly logical when such a theory of origin is maintained, to deny the validity of the higher degrees, and to declare, in strict accordance with the solemn act of union between the two Grand Lodges of the Freemasons of England, in December 1813, that pure Antient Masonry consists of 3 degrees and no more, viz., those of the entered apprentice, the fellow craft, and the master mason, including the supreme order of the Holy Royal Arch. All other degrees and rights are, among the more uncompromising adherents of this school, regarded as continental innovations and are accordingly repudiated as spurious Masonry. In matters of interpretation, the authentics have ventured scarcely further than a moralization upon the symbols and ceremonies of Masonry as a mere adjunct to Anglican Christianity. The anthropological school, a second school, presently still in its formative stages, is actively applying the discoveries of anthropology to a study of Masonic history, with truly remarkable results. Anthropologists have compiled a vast repository of information regarding the religious and initiatory customs of numerous peoples, both ancient and modern. Concurrently, Masonic scholars within this field have identified many of our signs and symbols, pertaining to both the craft and the higher degrees, within the wall paintings, carvings, sculptures, and architectural monuments of the world's foremost civilizations. The anthropological school, therefore, attributes a considerably greater degree of antiquity to Freemasonry than the authentics have ever dared to concede. Furthermore, it delineates striking analogies with the ancient mysteries of various nations, which demonstrably possessed our symbols and signs and, in all probability, practiced ceremonies analogous to those executed within Masonic lodges today. These anthropologists do not restrict their inquiries solely to antiquity. They have also investigated the initiatory rites of numerous extant tribes in both Africa and Australia, discovering that these groups employ signs and gestures still utilized by modern Freemasons. Striking parallels to our Masonic rites have similarly been identified among the inhabitants of India and Syria. These elements are interwoven with their religious philosophies in a manner that renders the notion of European derivation entirely untenable. While Masonic scholars have by no means exhausted the wealth of facts waiting to be unearthed in this fascinating field of research, our current understanding makes it unequivocally clear that rites analogous to those we designate as Masonic rank among the most ancient on earth, existing in some iteration across virtually all regions of the globe. Our signs manifest in Egypt and Mexico, in China and India, as well as in Greece and Rome. They are inscribed upon the temples of Burma and the cathedrals of medieval Europe. Moreover, it is reported that shrines exist in southern India where the very same secrets are imparted beneath binding obligations as those communicated to us within the craft and the high grades of modern Europe and America. Prominent pioneers in this discipline include Brother Albert Churchward, author of several compelling volumes concerning the Egyptian origins of Freemasonry, although his approach may occasionally lack rigorous critical scrutiny. Brother John Sebastian Marlowe Ward, author of Freemasonry and the Ancient Gods, who was Hiram Abiff, and numerous other texts, who posits Syria as the fount of Freemasonry, yet has synthesized a mass of invaluable data from myriad other lands. And Mr. Bernard Henry Springett, author of Secret Sects of Syria and Lebanon, who has amassed a substantial body of material detailing Masonic rites among the Arabs. The endeavors of the anthropological school have thus provided a lucid revelation regarding the immense antiquity and widespread diffusion of what we now term Masonic symbolism. It tends, however, to trace the origins of the ancient mysteries to the initiatory customs of primitive tribes, which, despite their admittedly incalculable age, frequently lack both dignity and spiritual depth. Another significant achievement born of these efforts is the justification for classifying many of the higher degrees as pure anti-ant masonry. Notwithstanding the previously cited pronouncement of the Grand Lodge of England, there exists an equal measure of evidence supporting the extreme antiquity of the Rosecroix as there is for the signs and symbols of the Craft and Royal Arch, a verity that holds equally true for the signs of numerous other degrees. Anthropological research makes it unequivocally clear that, regardless of the precise links in the ancestral chain, we in Freemasonry are the inheritors of a profoundly ancient tradition, one that has been associated for countless ages with the most sacred mysteries of religious worship. The mystical school, a third school of Masonic thought, which we may designate as the mystical, approaches the mysteries of the craft from an entirely divergent perspective, interpreting them as a blueprint for humanity's spiritual awakening and inner development. Thinkers aligned with this tradition, drawing upon the testimony of their personal spiritual experiences, declare that the degrees of the order symbolize distinct states of consciousness. These states must be awakened within the individual initiate should he aspire to attain the treasures of the spirit. They bear witness to a different and significantly more exalted dimension regarding the validity of our Masonic rites, a testimony rooted in religion rather than empirical science. The ultimate objective of the mystic is conscious union with the divine, and to a Freemason of this school, the craft is designed to illuminate the path toward that supreme goal, offering what might be likened to a map to guide the steps of the spiritual seeker. Consequently, such students are frequently more invested in esoteric interpretation than in rigorous historical research. They are not primarily concerned with tracing a precise chronological lineage from antiquity. Rather, their focus lies in embodying the life prescribed by the order's symbols, thereby enabling them to realize the spiritual verities of which those symbols are mere shadows. They maintain, nevertheless, that Freemasonry is at least closely akin to the ancient mysteries, which were instituted for precisely the same purpose, to offer humanity a pathway to the divine. Furthermore, they deeply lament the reality that the majority of modern brethren have so profoundly forgotten the glory of their Masonic heritage as to allow these ancient rites to degenerate into little more than hollow formalities. A prominent representative of this school is Brother Arthur Edward Waite, one of the foremost Masonic scholars of his era and an esteemed authority on the history of the higher degrees. Another distinguished figure is Brother Walter Leslie Wilmshurst, who has provided profound and beautifully spiritual interpretations of Masonic symbolism. This school has been highly instrumental in the spiritualization of masculine Freemasonry, and the increasingly apparent and profound reverence for our mysteries is undoubtedly a testament to its enduring influence. The occult school. The fourth school of thought is represented by a continually expanding body of students within the Comasonic order, and it is gradually attracting adherents within masculine Freemasonry as well. Given that one of its primary and distinctive tenets is the sacramental efficacy of Masonic ceremonial when duly and lawfully performed, it may be appropriately termed the sacramental or occult school. The term occultism has been widely misunderstood. It may be defined as the study and comprehension of the hidden aspects of nature through the utilization of faculties that reside within all human beings, though they remain dormant in the majority. These latent powers may be awakened and cultivated in the occult student through prolonged, meticulous discipline and meditation. The objective of the occultist, no less than that of the mystic, is conscious union with the divine. However, their respective methods of approach diverge significantly. The occultist endeavors to achieve this union through knowledge and willful volition. This process entails refining the entirety of one's nature, physical, emotional, and mental, until it becomes a flawless expression of the indwelling divine spirit. Consequently, the individual may be employed as an efficacious instrument in the grand design established by the Creator for human evolution, an endeavor typified in Freemasonry by the construction of the Holy Temple. Conversely, the mystic aspires toward an ecstatic union with whichever echelon of divine consciousness his current stage of spiritual evolution permits him to apprehend. The path of the occultist proceeds through a graded sequence of steps, a trajectory of initiations conferring successive expansions of consciousness and increments of sacramental power. By contrast, the journey of the mystic is frequently more individualistic in character. It is a flight of the alone to the alone, as Plotinus so eloquently articulated. For the occultist, the precise observance of ritual form is of paramount importance. Through the practice of ceremonial magic, He constructs a vehicle capable of drawing down the divine light and radiating it outward for the betterment of the world, summoning to his aid the assistance of angels, nature spirits, and other denizens of the invisible realms. The method of the mystic, conversely, relies upon prayer and orison. He concerns himself not at all with outward forms, although, through his union therewith, he too serves as a conduit for the divine life. It appears to me that he forfeits the profound advantage of the collective endeavor undertaken by the occultist, an effort immensely fortified by the assistance of the higher beings whose presence he invokes. Both of these paths lead to God. To some of us, the former will appeal irresistibly, while to others, the latter. It is largely a matter of the ray to which we inherently belong. The one is oriented more outwardly in service and sacrifice, whereas the other is directed more inwardly in contemplation and love. The knowledge of the occultist. The student of occultism, therefore, learns to awaken and cultivate for scientific application the powers latent within himself. By such means, he is enabled to perceive far more of the true significance of life than the individual whose vision remains constrained by the physical senses. He learns that every man is inherently divine, a veritable spark of God's fire, gradually evolving toward a destiny of glory and splendor that culminates in union with God. He discovers that the mechanism of this progress consists of successive descents into earthly bodies for the acquisition of experience, followed by withdrawals into realms or planes invisible to the physical eye. He finds that this progression is governed by a law of eternal justice, which bestows upon every man the fruits of his own sowing, joy for goodness and suffering for malevolence. He learns, moreover, that the world is governed, under the will of the Most High, by a brotherhood of adepts. These adepts have themselves attained divine union, yet they remain upon the earth to guide humanity. He recognizes that all the great religions of the world were established by them, tailored to the specific needs of the races for which they were intended, and that within these religions there have existed schools of the mysteries. These schools offer to those who are prepared a more accelerated path of unfoldment, affording greater knowledge and expanded opportunities for service, a path that is formally divided into steps and degrees, the probationary path or the lower mysteries, wherein candidates are prepared for discipleship, and the path proper or the greater mysteries in which are conferred within the Great White Lodge itself 5 great initiations. These lead the disciple from earthly existence to the life of adeptship in God, allowing him to become, as it is said, a living flame for the illumination of the world. He is instructed that God, both within the universe and within man, manifests himself as a trinity of wisdom, strength, and beauty, and that these 3 aspects are represented within the Great White Lodge in the persons of its 3 principal officers, through whom the mighty power of God descends unto humanity. The occult records. It will be observed that this occult knowledge depends no more upon the study of books and records than do the experiences of the mystics. Both belong to a higher order of consciousness, the existence of which cannot be adequately demonstrated upon the physical plane. Nevertheless, the study of physical plane records of the past holds value in corroborating the historical investigations of the trained occultist, who possesses the ability to read what are occasionally termed the Akashic records, thereby acquiring a precise knowledge of antiquity. This subject is so scarcely understood that it may perhaps prove beneficial if, at this juncture, I quote at some length from a volume entitled Clairvoyance, which I authored many years ago. Upon the mental plane, these records present 2 profoundly distinct aspects. When a visitor to that plane is not directing his thoughts specifically toward them, These records merely constitute a background to whatever may be transpiring, much as the reflections in a pier glass at the far end of a room might form a backdrop to the activities of the individuals therein. It must always be borne in mind that, under such conditions, they are in truth merely reflections of the ceaseless activity of a grand consciousness situated upon a vastly higher plane. However, if the trained investigator focuses his attention specifically upon any single scene, or desires to summon it before him, an extraordinary transformation instantaneously occurs. For this is the plane of thought, and to think of a thing is to bring it immediately into one's presence. For instance, should a man will to observe the record of Julius Caesar's landing in England, he finds himself, within a moment, standing upon the shore amidst the legionaries. The entire scene is enacted around him, exact in every detail, precisely as he would have witnessed it had he stood there in the flesh on that autumn morning in the year 55 BC. Since that which he perceives is but a reflection, the actors are, naturally, entirely oblivious to his presence. Nor can any effort on his part alter the course of their actions in the slightest degree, save only that he may control the tempo at which the drama unfolds before him. He may have the events of an entire year rehearsed before his eyes within a single hour, or he may, at any moment, halt the progression altogether, holding any particular scene in view as a static tableau for as long as he desires. In truth, he observes not merely what he would have seen had he been physically present at the time, but significantly more. He hears and comprehends all that the individuals say, and he is acutely conscious of all their thoughts and motives. Indeed, one of the most fascinating among the myriad possibilities that emerge for one who has learned to read the records is the study of the thought of ages long past, the mindset of the cavemen and the lake dwellers, equally with that which governed the mighty civilizations of Atlantis, Egypt, or Chaldea. What splendid possibilities unfurl before the man who is in full possession of this faculty may be easily imagined. He has laid out before him a field of historical research of the most entrancing interest. Not only may he review at his leisure all the history with which we are acquainted, correcting, as he examines it, the numerous errors and misconceptions that have crept into the accounts bequeathed to us, but he may also range at will over the entirety of the world's narrative from its very inception. He may observe the gradual development of intellect in humanity, the descent of the lords of the flame, and the expansion of the formidable civilizations which they established. Nor is his study confined solely to the progress of humanity. He has before him, as though in a vast museum, all the peculiar animal and botanical forms that occupied the global stage in the days when the world was young. He is able to trace all the wondrous geological transformations that have transpired, and to observe the course of the great cataclysms that have repeatedly altered the entire face of the earth. In one particular circumstance, an even more profound sympathy with the past becomes accessible to the reader of the records. If, in the course of his inquiries, he must look upon a scene in which he himself participated during a former incarnation, he may approach it in two distinct ways. He may either regard it in the customary manner, as a mere spectator, or he may once more identify himself with that long-deceased personality of his. He may temporarily project himself back into that life of long ago, thereby absolutely re-experiencing the thoughts and the emotions, the pleasures and the pains, of a prehistoric past. In the light of such occult knowledge, Masonry is revealed to be far grander and more sacred than its initiates generally appear to realize. As tradition has consistently indicated, it is found to be a direct descendant of the mysteries of Egypt, and its enduring purpose remains to serve as a portal to the authentic mysteries of the Great White Lodge. It offers to its initiates vastly more than mere moralization upon builders' tools. Yet, it remains firmly founded upon the purest principles of piety and virtue, for without the rigorous practice of morality and the leading of an ethical life, no genuine spiritual progress is possible. The ceremonies of Freemasonry serve as dramatizations, as it were, of specific segments of the invisible worlds. These are the realms through which the candidate must traverse following death in the ordinary course of nature, and which he must likewise enter in full consciousness during the rites of initiation into those true mysteries, of which Masonry itself is a reflection. Each degree corresponds to a distinct plane of nature, or to a specific facet thereof, and possesses successive layers of significance applicable to the consciousness of the great architect of the universe, the constitution of the cosmos, and the fundamental principles within man, in accordance with the occult law articulated by Hermes Trismegistus and adopted in later epochs by Rosicrucians, alchemists, and students of the Kabbalah. As above, so below. The Masonic rites are thus ceremonies of the probationary path, designed as a preparation for true initiation, a school intended to train the brethren for the far more profound knowledge of the path proper. The sacramental power. To the occult student, Masonry presents another aspect of paramount importance, concerning which I have written in The Hidden Life in Freemasonry. It is not merely a wondrous and intricate system of occult symbols enshrining the secrets of the invisible realms. It concurrently possesses a sacramental dimension of the utmost beauty and value, benefiting not only its initiates but the world at large. The execution of the ritual for each degree is designed to invoke spiritual power. Firstly, to assist the brother upon whom the degree is conferred in awakening within himself that aspect of consciousness corresponding to the degree's symbolism, to the fullest extent possible. Secondly, to foster the spiritual evolution of the assembled members. And thirdly, and most significantly, to pour forth a deluge of spiritual vitality intended to uplift, fortify, and encourage all members of the craft. Some years ago, I undertook an investigation into the concealed aspects of the sacraments within the Catholic Church, publishing the findings of that inquiry in a volume entitled The Science of the Sacraments. Those who have read that work will recall that the outward emanation of spiritual power is a primary objective of the celebration of the Holy Eucharist, as well as of other ecclesiastical services. This is achieved through the invocation of an angel to construct a spiritual temple within the inner realms, utilizing the forces generated by the love and devotion of the congregation, and subsequently charging that edifice with the tremendous power invoked during the consecration of the sacred elements. A somewhat analogous result is achieved during the ceremonies performed by the Masonic Lodge, although the methodology is not entirely identical, being, in truth, far more ancient. Each of our rituals, when meticulously executed, similarly erects a temple in the inner worlds, through which the spiritual power invoked at the initiation of the candidate is both stored and radiated. Thus, Masonry is revealed, in the sacramental sense equally as in the mystical, to be the art of building spiritualized, and every Masonic lodge ought to serve as a channel of considerable magnitude for the dissemination of spiritual blessings across the district in which it labors. Sometimes orders and rites that were once conduits of tremendous force have, as the years progressed, admitted brethren less worthy than their predecessors, individuals who prioritized personal gain over service to humanity. In such instances, the spiritual powers associated with those grades were either entirely withdrawn by the head of all true Freemasons, to be subsequently bestowed upon another, more suitable group, or permitted to remain dormant until more fitting candidates could be found to bear them worthily. In the latter scenario, the mere succession was passed down, transmitting, as it were, the seeds of the power, even while the power itself largely remained in abeyance. Conversely, there have been occasions wherein a rite or grade was fabricated by a student desiring to cast a profound truth into ceremonial form, despite possessing little knowledge of this inner dimension of Masonry. If such a degree or rite performed useful work and attracted suitable candidates, sacramental powers appropriate to that rank were sometimes infused into it. This occurred either through a brother on the physical plane who held one of the aforementioned lines of succession, which was then adapted for the work by the head of all true Freemasons, or through direct, non-physical intervention from the unseen realms. Furthermore, the internal effect of a specific degree, even within a fully valid rite, may vary significantly depending upon the degree of advancement and the general disposition of the brother receiving it. Consequently, in one instance, the 33 degrees might confer stupendous spiritual power, whereas in another, less worthy case, the bestowed powers would be substantially diminished due to the candidate's incapacity to respond adequately to them. In these situations, a more profound degree of power will manifest only as further advancement is achieved in the development of the candidate's character. It likewise appears possible for power to be temporarily withdrawn in the event of malefaction by one of the brethren, only to be subsequently restored once the transgressive behavior has ceased. All of this may appear somewhat bewildering to the student focused merely upon the formal aspects of Masonry. Indeed, it remains a fact that there are scarcely any means on the physical plane to ascertain the esoteric effect of a given degree without referencing those who are enacting it. It may, however, be stated as a general principle that the principal lines of Masonic tradition, those possessing the greatest inner or spiritual value, are the craft degrees, upon which all subsequent grades are superimposed, alongside the mark and the arch degrees, and the paramount degrees of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, namely the 18 degrees, 30 degrees, and 33 degrees. While other conferred degrees possess their own distinct powers that are frequently of great value, the grades I have delineated are those deemed by the head of all true Freemasons to be of the utmost importance to our present generation. Therefore, they are the ones currently practiced within the Masonic order. Another lineage of profound interest, though vastly different from any other degrees extant among us, is that of the rites of Memphis and Mizraim. These represent relics in their occult power, if not in their outward form, of perhaps the most ancient mysteries ever to exist upon the earth. These, too, have their designated role to play in the future, just as they did in the past, and have consequently been preserved and transmitted to us in the present day. The form and the life. In all instances, we must recognize that the outward form of the Masonic degrees and their inner life are two vastly different entities. Although, naturally, in a flawless system, such as that of the ancient mysteries at the zenith of their glory, the two would correspond perfectly. Masonry currently remains in a transitional stage, only just emerging from the profound ignorance of the Dark Ages. The rites of Memphis and Mizraim serve as a prime illustration of this discrepancy. These colossal systems of 96 degrees and 90 degrees, respectively, constitute a mass of artificially constructed ceremonies. They offer little substantive value to the Masonic student, save as a historical record of high-grade Masonic invention in France during the late 18th century. The majority of these degrees harbor negligible occult power, having simply been inserted into the rites by brethren who could not have comprehended their genuine purpose. Nevertheless, behind the rites themselves, and quite independent of the tradition's formal aspects, a line of succession has been bequeathed from a past even more ancient than that of the Scottish Rite. Even within the Scottish Rite, many of the intermediate degrees possess but minimal occult value. The entirety of this situation may be best comprehended by realizing that the architectural plan of Masonry rests in the hands of the head of all true Freemasons. He governs his mighty order with impeccable justice and the most wondrous skill, ensuring that all actions are undertaken for the supreme good of all. The powers standing behind Freemasonry are profoundly great and holy, making it entirely fitting that they be conferred in their absolute fullness only upon those who are disposed to utilize them righteously and to treat them with the reverence they so richly deserve. There exists a great and glorious reality situated perpetually in the background, forever pressing toward full actualization, and employing whichever channels become available for its ultimate manifestation. Whatever instruments are available are invariably utilized to their absolute fullest extent, and no individual need harbor the fear of being overlooked. It remains evident, however, that when the brethren prioritize the gratification of their personal vanity over the hidden work, when they expend their hours in banqueting and revelry, curtailing the sacred ritual merely that they may adjourn to the south with undue haste, they render themselves far less worthy conduits of the divine glory than those more spiritually attuned brethren who are genuinely willing to study and to comprehend. Unceasingly, the head of all true Freemasons observes. He registers the most minuscule endeavor of the craftsman to serve, and he shall pour forth his wondrous power precisely to the degree that the brethren render themselves worthy of such an endowment. Orthodoxy and heresy. An additional consideration that arises in connection with the transmission of Masonic degrees shall be more comprehensively expounded upon as our discourse proceeds. We must recognize that Masonic ritual does not merely represent a singular orthodoxy juxtaposed against an array of heresies and schisms. Rather, there exist as many lineages of formal tradition as there are modalities of succession regarding inner power. The mysteries practiced throughout the disparate nations of the ancient world varied considerably in the minutiae of their form and legend, and vestiges of these historical divergences endure within the manifold workings presently utilized among us. Numerous, equally legitimate streams of tradition have intersected and interwoven continuously throughout the ages, exerting varying degrees of mutual influence upon one another. The spatial arrangement of the principal officers within a craft lodge, for instance, diverges notably between English and continental Masonry. English Masonry adheres to the ancient Egyptian method of their configuration, whereas continental Masonry adopts the Chaldean schema, positioning them in the shape of an isosceles triangle. The potencies inherent in the succession of installing masters across these two paradigms are fundamentally identical. Nonetheless, because continental lodges have truncated the ceremony of installation to its barest vestige, they confer only the minimum quotient of power requisite for the actual transmission of the degrees, thereby bestowing considerably less upon the right worshipful master than is afforded under the English protocol. This, however, is fundamentally a matter of formal imperfection rather than an absolute absence of power. The spiritual forces underpinning Masonry operate through these divergent forms in accordance with the intrinsic merit of the form itself, as well as the sovereign will of the head of all true Freemasons, who stands as the sole arbiter regarding the endlessly debated distinction between genuine and spurious Masonry. Evaluated through this perspective of Masonic succession, it becomes evident that genuine rites are those that inherently possess and successfully transmit spiritual power. Conversely, spurious Masonry entails the performance of an empty form from which, for one reason or another, the vital essence has been withdrawn, or to which it was never genuinely connected. In the subsequent chapters, I shall endeavor to delineate the descent of the Masonic tradition from the Egyptian mysteries to the present era. I shall not attempt to meticulously document every discrete link in the chain of succession, an undertaking that would require the labor of a lifetime and yield no deeper edification for the student, but shall instead illuminate momentous epochs within Masonic history, as apprehended by the inner sight and corroborated by the treatises of Masonic scholars. Chapter 2. The Ancient Egyptian Source. In the Hidden Life in Freemasonry, I delineated, to a certain extent, the form and profound significance of Freemasonry as I experienced it in Egypt approximately 6 millennia ago. That specific form was predominantly attributable to the incarnation of the world teacher among the Egyptian populace approximately 40,000 BC, during which epoch he imparted to them the sublime doctrine of the hidden light. It may be prudent to provide a brief historical sketch of the nation from that primordial era until 13,500 BC, the temporal juncture at which I commenced my narrative in the preceding volume. The conventionally authenticated history of Egypt, as established by modern antiquarians, commences with the First Dynasty, founded by Mena or Manu around 5000 BC. Though the precise chronologies are variously cited. It is generally postulated that the pyramids of Gizeh, which figured so prominently in the esoteric dimensions of Egyptian worship, were constructed by the monarchs of the Fourth Dynasty, Khufu, Cheops, Khafra, Chephren, and Menkaure, Mycerinus, during the 4th millennium BC. Yet the inner history of Egypt and its monumental pyramids extends significantly further into antiquity, reaching back into eons concerning which even tradition remains almost entirely silent. Nonetheless, certain echoes of the reigns of the divine kings of the Atlantean dynasties, who governed Egypt for many thousands of years, still resonate within the Egyptian and Greek mythologies of the gods and demigods purportedly sovereign prior to the advent of Manu. According to Manetho, the Egyptian historian of the Ptolemaic period whose original treatises are now lost, these gods and demigods reigned for an expanse of 12,843 years. Following their epoch came the Nikis or Manes, who are recorded to have reigned for 5,813 years. It remains a distinct possibility that some among these may be identified with the Shemsu-Heru, or followers of Horus, who find frequent mention within ancient Egyptian texts. Diodorus Siculus, who journeyed to Egypt circa 57 BC, recounts the traditional belief that the gods and heroes had maintained sovereignty over the realm for slightly less than 18,000 years preceding the era of Mena. The volume Man Whence, How and Whither transports us substantially deeper into antiquity and provides the ensuing historical facts. The Atlantean subjugation of Egypt transpired more than 150,000 years ago, and the first magnificent Egyptian empire endured until the cataclysm of 75,025 BC. During that catastrophe, the two massive islands of Ruda and Daitya were overwhelmed beneath the ocean, leaving only the island of Poseidones extant. It was during the supremacy of this empire that the three pyramids were erected, meticulously aligned with the astronomical and mathematical erudition of the Atlantean priesthood. Furthermore, it is toward this profound antiquity that we must direct our gaze to discern the genesis of those mysteries that have been bequeathed to us through the ceremonies of Freemasonry. Even in that distant epoch, the ceremonies were already considered ancient, necessitating a search into a still more remote past to uncover their ultimate inception. Amidst the immense cataclysm of 75,025 BC, the entirety of the Egyptian landscape was inundated. Absolutely nothing remained of its former glory save the 3 solitary pyramids rising majestically above the deluge. Subsequently, once the resultant swamplands had once more become habitable, a period of Negroid domination ensued. Thereafter, the territory was recolonized by the Atlanteans, who meticulously restored the splendor of the Egyptian temples and reinstituted the hidden mysteries that had formerly been celebrated within the Great Pyramid. This ensuing empire endured until the Aryanization of Egypt circa 13,500 BC. It was governed by an illustrious dynasty of divine kings, a lineage encompassing many of the heroes whom the Greeks would subsequently venerate as demigods, including Heracles of the 12 Labors, whose mythos was faithfully transmitted into classical antiquity. It was unto this civilization, approximately 40,000 BC, that the world teacher emerged from the White Lodge, bearing the name of Tahuti or Thoth, subsequently styled Hermes by the Greeks. He instituted the exoteric cult of the Egyptian deities and restored the inner mysteries to the resplendent glory of bygone days. He arrived to impart the profound doctrine of the inner light to the temple priests, addressing the powerful sacerdotal hierarchy of Egypt, over which the pharaoh presided. Within the inner sanctum of the principal temple, he instructed them regarding the light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world, a locution of his that was subsequently bequeathed through the ages, finding an echo within the 4th Gospel through its early, Egyptian-hued phraseology. He elucidated that this light was universal in nature, and that the very same light which was synonymous with God dwelled intimately within the heart of every individual. I am that light, he bade them repeat, that light am I. That light, he proclaimed, constitutes the true essence of man, even if mortals may fail to recognize it and persist in neglecting its presence. Osiris is light. He came forth from the light, he dwells in the light, he is the light. The light is concealed universally. It resides within every rock and within every stone. When an individual achieves unity with Osiris the light, he merges with the entirety of which he was previously but a fragment, and consequently, he gains the capacity to perceive the light within all beings, regardless of how profoundly it may be obscured, suppressed, or confined. All else is non-existent, but the light truly is. The light constitutes the very life of mankind. For every individual, despite the existence of glorious ceremonies, the manifold duties required of the priesthood, and the numerous avenues through which humanity may be assisted, that light remains more intimate than anything else, residing deep within his very heart. To every man, the ultimate reality is more immediate than any ritual. He need only direct his gaze inward, and then shall he behold the light. Such is the profound objective of every rite, and ceremonies ought not to be abolished. For I come not to destroy, but to fulfill. Once a man attains true knowledge, he transcends the ceremony. He advances toward Osiris, journeying unto the light Amenare, from whence all creation emanated, and unto which all shall ultimately return. Osiris dwells within the heavens, yet Osiris is concurrently present within the deepest recesses of the human heart. When Osiris within the heart recognizes Osiris in the heavens, man is elevated to the divine, and Osiris, formerly shattered into fragments, is rendered whole once more. But behold, Osiris, the divine spirit, and Isis, the eternal mother, impart life unto Horus, who represents humanity. Man born of both, yet inextricably united with Osiris. Horus merges into Osiris and Isis, who heretofore embodied matter, is transmuted through him into the Queen of Life and Wisdom. Furthermore, Osiris, Isis, and Horus are alike begotten of the light. Twofold is the birth of Horus. Initially, he is born of Isis, the divine descending into humanity, assuming the flesh of the eternal mother, Matter, the ever-virgin. Subsequently, he is born anew into Osiris, thereby redeeming his mother from her protracted quest for the fragments of her husband that had been scattered across the earth. He is born into Osiris at the precise moment that Osiris within the heart beholds Osiris in the heavens, recognizing that the twain are inextricably one. Thus did he instruct, and the wise among the priesthood rejoiced. Unto Pharaoh the monarch he imparted the motto, "Look for the light," he declared, asserting that a sovereign could govern with excellence only insofar as he perceived the light within the heart of every subject. Moreover, unto the populace he bestowed as a motto, "Thou art the light, let that light shine." He subsequently inscribed this maxim around the pylon of a magnificent temple, tracing its path ascending one pillar, traversing the lintel, and descending the opposing pillar. Consequently, this phrase was engraved above the entryways of dwellings, and miniature replicas were fashioned of the pylon bearing his inscription. These models were crafted from precious metals as well as baked clay, ensuring that even the most impoverished could acquire diminutive blue clay iterations, permeated with brown veins and elegantly glazed. Another favored motto was, "Follow the light," and this subsequently evolved into, "Follow the king," a maxim that proliferated westward to become the legendary motto of the Round Table. Additionally, the populace learned to say of their deceased, "He has gone to the light." Thus, the jubilant civilization of Egypt grew even more radiant, for he had dwelled among them as the very embodiment of the light. The priests whom he had instructed perpetuated his teachings and esoteric directives, enshrining them within their mysteries. Consequently, seekers from all nations arrived to assimilate the wisdom of the Egyptians, and the renown of the Egyptian schools proliferated across all lands. The gods of Egypt. It is evident from the preceding discourse that the deities, or more accurately, the manifestations of deity, Osiris, Isis, and Horus were already familiar to the populace, and the world teacher incorporated into his mission the task of directing their attention toward the profound significance of these three persons. The precise epoch during which the knowledge of these three aspects of God was introduced into the land remains unknown. Nevertheless, by the era of our experience, they had firmly established their positions within the symbology of the mysteries. Isis and Osiris. Isis, unto whom the lesser mysteries were attributed, represented not merely the universal feminine principle expressed throughout nature, but also a tangible and exceedingly exalted being. This is precisely as the Christ constitutes the universal life, the second logos, while simultaneously serving as a high official within the occult hierarchy. By virtue of her profound spiritual development and authoritative office, she possessed the capacity to represent the feminine aspect of the deity unto mankind. Isis was the mother of all that lives, as well as the embodiment of wisdom, truth, and power. Upon her temple at Sais, the following inscription was written, "I am that which is, which hath been, and which shall be, and no man has ever lifted the veil that hides my divinity from mortal eyes." The moon served as her symbol, and the influence she outpoured upon her worshippers, accompanied by the music of the shaken sistrum, manifested as a brilliant blue light veined with delicate silver, reminiscent of shimmering moonbeams, the mere touch of which bestowed profound spiritual upliftment and ecstasy. Osiris stood as the embodiment of God the Father within a formidable planetary spirit. His symbol was the sun, and the celestial influence he bestowed was a dazzling glory of light permeated with gold, akin to solar rays captured upon the tranquil surface of a lake. The influence of Horus, who epitomized the divine child, materialized as the glowing rose and gold of that eternal love which constitutes flawless wisdom. Animal deities. The Egyptians further adhered. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.